we're going to talk next, or we're going to hear next from Russia. So I'd like to invite Jennifer Udder, I pronounced that correctly, I hope, Maria Badak, Fedor Egorov, and Helen Lloyd to come and join me here, so we're all ready. And the way this part of the afternoon is going to work, we're going to hear about Russia first, then, get the order right, then we're going to hear about China, and then the United States. And in each case, we're going to have a factual presentation at the beginning, which Jennifer is about to give us in the matter of Russia. And then I'll ask my excellent panel to say hello and a few reactions on what they've heard, and then we'll open it up to a debate.
Thank you very much for the introduction. If you allow me, I'm going to jump directly into the facts and figures. As we can see from the graph, Russian arrivals to Europe saw healthy growth over the past years, reaching to its highest in 2013. Since then, European destinations saw the number of Russian arrivals plummet significantly, and accounting for 23 million in 2014 and an estimated 19 million so far this year. For this market, it is estimated that growth declined by 18% as compared to the same period this year. And also notable is its shrinking market share, which has been reduced from more than 5% 2 years ago to 3.2% over this period. Generally speaking, foreign travel has become costly for Russians, and the factors behind this weak performance revolve around international sanctions the country is enduring, the devaluation of its currency against the euro, falling oil prices, geopolitical disruptions, and the current economic downturn. Essentially, the following map displays the subregions that welcomed the highest numbers of Russian travelers. As we can see, there's a vast majority concentrating in Central Eastern Europe and also in Southern Europe. In the first case for Central Eastern destinations, this is due largely to affordability and easy access. And in the case of Southern Europe, is essentially because these destinations can cater to the beach and sun and beach desires of the Russian holidaymakers. Moreover, projections for 2020, which are represented by the bars on the right hand, point at an upward trend for these main subregions. Top 10 ranking for the most popular destinations is led by Ukraine, which holds the highest share of Russian travelers, and it's followed by Turkey in the second position. And also traditional hotspot destinations like Spain, Greece, Germany, and Italy are also among European holiday favorites for the Russians. And finally, the ranking is completed by Czech Republic, Finland, Cyprus, and Austria. Finally, the total Russian outbound is so far estimated at 33 million and is expected to reach a total of 45 million by 2020, which is translated into a 25% increase and 11 million more arrivals. This positive performance is also expected to boost tourism arrivals at European destinations, and this is expected to account for 32 million by 2020 in Europe. Finally, also important to mention, growth remains slow but steady for this market. And finally, it's important to bear in mind that Europe still remains the first choice for Russian travelers, which is good news. And to sum up, Russia's economic and tourism demand for the coming years still features up an encouraging development.
Jennifer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Okay, now I'm going very briefly to introduce the panel, and then I'm going to ask each of them to respond a little. Fedor Egorov was born in Zhukovsky to a family of engineers in the aviation industry, then studied in Moscow before moving into travel and business travel development, and where he works today. Helen Lloyd is Director of Tourism and Marketing and Intelligence, one of the leading travel representation and communication companies in Moscow. Set up this company in 2000 after working at Visit Britain, and therefore has an understanding of this part of Europe as well, and is a British national. And finally, Maria Badak has been with the ITE Group for more than 15 years, starting in their office in St. Petersburg and relocating to London in 2006. Has been a divisional director for ITE Travel Exhibitions for 8 years, and is herself a passionate traveller who likes to discover off-the-beaten-track places. So perhaps I'll go in the order that it's written down. Maria, perhaps you could start us off.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks to the organizers to inviting me here today. As you can imagine, our main show in Russia has been a witness to all recent developments in the market. And since 2014, we have seen a lot of changes in our main markets, which is Russia, Ukraine, and even Kazakhstan. So everything that was said today, I couldn't agree with it more, especially the visa situation to the Russian nationals. I think on the brink of this Ukrainian invasion, or whatever happened there in 2014, there was a discussion of canceling the visas to the Russian citizens. And it was all over the news which countries in the European Union were supportive and which were not that supportive. But anyway, this discussion was going on both in the Russian parliament and the European parliament. But since 2014, unfortunately, it's looking less and less realistic these days. So if this happened 2 years ago, we would be talking not only double-digit growth from the Russian outbound market. I think it could easily be in the region of over 50 to 70%. Because without even these new visa regulations, the market was growing double digits each year. So the visa law didn't happen, and together with political and economical circumstances which the country was going through in the recent years, the market has decreased by 50 to 70% for most of the destinations. So now it's really difficult times, and this year, well, our clients say that 2015 was probably the bottom of the market. Not sure if my colleagues agree with me, but we are trying to be positive and just say that next year will be better than this one, because 2015 was that bad that it can only go to next level up, not down. So that's what we witnessed in our show.
Okay, very good. That's good. Great sort of optimistic note to a slightly downbeat observation. Fedor.
Yeah. I just want to a little bit introduce me, because you started with about where I was born. And
I know, I started off, I've got a lot to read, so I decided to summarize it a bit. So say a bit
yeah,
more.
okay. I just developed Russian market for Booking.com when it's come, and then goes to Ostrovok. It's leading Russian online OTA. And now in .travel.com, that's part of BSI. Basically summarizing, it's all about online travel and inbound and outbound. I could agree with Maria about visa story, but also from other side, now fingerprinting is a bad, but in long-term perspective is a good step, because now we will have a chance to have a really long-term visas for 3-5 years, and it will help us to grow from big cities to Europe. This year it will be, of course, fall. Due to economic situation and the fingerprinting, because it's still just introducing to us. But I think in 1-2 years perspective, it will help, because canceling the visa, it's from my side, it's a very big process, and it can't happen in the next 5-10 years, definitely. But this long term is really possible and will help to grow. About whole touristic market in Russia, it's yes and no also, because in outbound from Russia is really full. If last year we have 70% for outbound, and most of course it was Europe, and 30% inbound domestic travel. But this year it's mostly around 70% domestic. And it's Sochi, Crimea for summer, and could be also Sochi for a winter destination. And I hope next year the situation will change, and again we'll go to Europe, but also we have some barriers for this. It's not only about exchange rate, which fell for 50%. Of course, it's also some kind of, now it's really difficult to get cheap tickets to any destination. Air Berlin is gone, EasyJet has stopped flying from January, Transair also not in the market anymore. And it's very difficult to find something cheaper than 150 euros from Moscow to any city in Europe. And if some low cost will come to us and cover mostly European destinations with really cheap tickets, it could really help. And the third point, which I think can help Russia to have more visits to Europe, it's some special rates from hotels or promotion from government to Russian holidays. Because we have around 5 or 6 holidays, like May holidays, November, June, a lot of them. And the Europe is the first destination which comes to the mind when we think about where to spend it. But there is no special offers for this. Nobody thinks that it's could be a good idea for city breaks and maybe make some flights or charters for these dates. It could really help, I think.
Okay, well, that's something for somebody in the audience to have a think about. Special deals to attract, get Russian tourists back in bigger numbers again. So we'll come back to that. I want somebody to kind of have a thought and a view about that. And Helen, perhaps you can now.
Yep. Well, TMI, apart from being a representation company, we also do quite a lot of market research. So if I look at the overall picture, I don't think it's that negative. It's just a general dip in an overall increase, and the Russian market is going to increase as soon as the price of oil recovers slightly, because that's the main thing that's denting the value of the ruble. The sanctions, okay, don't help, but I don't think that they would have made much impact without the actual downward trend in the price of oil. So I think we all need to just kind of watch the oil price, and you will see the ruble more or less follow the same pattern. It is a big market. It's the coldest country on earth. So people are always going to travel abroad to go to warm places. If it's cold for sort of 6 or 7 months of the year, then, if you've got the opportunity to go to a warmer country, you'll go. As you can see already from, northwestern Europe, which are the traditional countries that started to travel south, Russians are much more numerous than any of the countries there. So those are important markets, particularly for, I think, Southern Europe. But as my colleagues here have said, Eastern Europe is very nearby. Eastern and Central Europe are accessible to many parts of Russia, because actually 2/3 of the population of Russia live in the European territory of Russia. Even though Russia is an enormous country, there's very few people living in Siberia or the Far East, so most of them are kind of congregated over to the European side. So Europe's a natural destination for Russians to go to. And definitely it's considered as a very attractive destination because of its diversity, because of its culture, because of its warmer climates, because of its food and gastronomy. There are many reasons why Russians want to come to Europe. And I think that's only going to increase as people's knowledge and sophistication, which is already there in some of the upper middle class segments, which are quite similar now to many European segments who travel to Europe. Obviously, the middle class has been hit most by this crisis, which is going on in Russia. So this affects cheaper destinations and group traffic. If you look at the luxury segment, there's very little dent in the change. Most luxury hotels across Europe are not seeing a big downward shift in the number of Russian tourists. So I think we have to be quite concrete about which countries we're talking about and which segments we're talking about, because some segments are maintaining themselves quite well. The MICE segment has been affected in terms of many more events are now starting to happen domestically or in the CIS region. This is a really opportunity for countries in the CIS area to attract Russian tourists who didn't have many Russian tourists, or at least high-spend tourists in the past. Coming back to the price of air tickets, definitely this is an issue. I speak to people in my office on a daily basis, and you know, certain people who are planning to come to Europe said in the end, listen, we can't, just the tickets are so ridiculously expensive. But the good news is that some airlines have really seen this as an opportunity. There's a kind of consolidation basically going on in the market. So Czech Airlines, for example, has decided to increase their flights to Russia. Russia's own Aeroflot has created a low-cost airline called Pobeda, and that will start launching cheap flights to Europe as of now. Basically, they're starting this winter, and they will fly to a lot of those destinations which have been cut by Air Berlin, moving out at the beginning of next year. So places like Salzburg, Berlin, will have flights actually by this Pobeda. German Wings will also take over some of the Air Berlin, so it's not all bad news. And I think that in general, if you talk to the airlines in Russia, some of them are really looking forward to the situation, those that are very well established, particularly our friends in the Middle East who seem to be so much more successful quite often than the European airlines like Emirates and Etihad, who all expect to have increase in flight yields from Russia because they see a lot of their competitors going down or leaving the market or reducing their flight connectivity. But flight costs definitely are a challenge at the moment, and one of the main reasons, you know, also connected with the devaluation of the ruble, why people are thinking twice about coming to Europe. But I would say finally, one of the challenges that we should all think about, because we all actually are part of that, is Europe able to be sophisticated enough for some of the Russian tourists? I was recently in Moscow, and I was really impressed with how people treat you in the restaurants. I don't know if it's because it's hard times, people are trying much more. The restaurants are open till what time you want to sit there. The food is amazing. The kitchens are open. The waiter who met me, you know, as I sneezed as I came in, said, "I've just got just the thing for you. It's you know, hot fruit tea with honey. I'm going to bring it to you now, you know, while you're sitting down." And I said, "Brilliant, thank you so much." And I thought to myself, actually, who would actually offer me that in Europe? I don't know that anyone is that attentive. And that's something that we need to be aware of, is that there's a great deal of flexibility. Moscow is the New York of the East, basically. It's a 24-hour city. If you want a haircut at 4 o'clock in the morning, there's a hairdresser's to go to. If you want to go to the supermarket, it's working. If you want to go clubbing any day of the week, there is a place there. You know, shops are generally open from 10 till 10. And if you look around many European capitals, you know, the cafes are closed at 6, the shops are closed at 7, you know, and really we don't offer the level of service that many Asian countries definitely are offering. I understand this is a challenge. We've got much stricter legislation. We've got much higher salary bills, and so that impacts on us, but it also impacts on the level of service. And it's not only about availability of places, but it's also about people really being motivated to serve you. And I think that's where Europe will have a challenge. You know, most people sit on fixed salaries in Europe and are not necessarily motivated to make that extra sale, as they seem to be able to do in Moscow and in many Asian destinations.
Great. Okay, now, bit of a challenge for the audience here, methinks. Incidentally, when I went to Novosibirsk, it was 40 degrees, but I agree it was midsummer. Temperature moves around a lot in Novosibirsk. Now, what about, given that Russia is clearly a significant long-term prospect for Europe, and that what's going on temporarily, and it is extraordinary that a struggle between Saudi Arabia and America over fracking can indirectly feed through to an impact on the ruble, which then affects this market. But, you know, what about building the markets or rebuilding the market? Has anybody in the audience thought about how to go about this, the challenge of offers and getting people used again to travelling from Russia to the rest of Europe? Anybody got a thought here? Can I provoke somebody who's thought about this? Yes, excellent. And can a microphone is heading towards you, which will be better for all concerned, I guess. Not you, perhaps, but the rest of us.
Hello, I'm David from ICT. Okay, it doesn't matter. I've got to press a button.
Keep going, keep it close to your...
Okay,
exactly.
bit closer.
That's
Sorry,
it.
I used to work on the radio, well, I should know this. You mentioned that some airlines are closing down routes to Russia. Surely that would actually put prices up because there's less competition, so that'll make it even more difficult for Russians to travel abroad.
I think that was the point, wasn't it? That was your point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the point, that with Air Berlin and other the Transair, EasyJet, that it is. I mean, there's less choice, more, therefore higher prices, therefore it's another barrier. So I think that was the point.
I think it's
And
mainly the
are the-
low-cost airlines that are closing. More the regular airlines, some are cutting their connections, but some are increasing because they see this as an opportunity to fill in and gain more market share in the long run.
Yeah, my point was more about low-cost airlines who stop flying, and that's why the cost of air tickets is going up.
But even Aeroflot hasn't reduced prices.
No.
No, I think it's not the reduction. I think we're all agreeing here. I think the point is that there's less competition and the prices are higher as a result. So, which is your point. So,
Yes.
I think that I think Helen, what Helen you were saying is that there's still a space in the upmarket part of the market for business travellers and those with money. But the part that's gone is the short. They are short-haul flights at low prices, which are what stimulates a great chunk of the tourism market. I think that was the point.
And of course, the obvious problem is the visa. But the other thing is, aren't Russians now finding Europe a bit of a hostile destination and going to other places outside of Europe? Especially exchange rates and also the fact that a lot of countries are supporting sanctions.
Well, that's sort of two questions wrapped together in a sort of Russian doll way, which is so there's a question. Do the actions of the European governments in the matter of sanctions create barriers to individuals? And secondly, is there any sense at all in Russia that if they were to go to the rest of Europe, that they would be less friendlily
I don't think that people have the perception that they would be badly received here. Definitely there's a segment, a very small segment of the population that are not allowed to travel to the countries. Those people belong to the security agencies in Russia who are not allowed to travel to countries that have imposed sanctions as a kind of protection of them. So that means that some people are not allowed to travel to Europe, but that's a very, very tiny amount of people at the end of the day. I think it's really a question of money. You know, it's just down to, can you get better value if you go somewhere else? But in fact, it doesn't really matter where you go because your exchange rate has devalued against all the currencies, not just, you know, the euro or the pound. It's every currency in the world. It's the Thai baht, it's, you know, the Turkish lira, unless they've happened to go down because of their own internal issues. So everywhere is more expensive, actually. But because if you consider Europe is a little bit more expensive in certain destinations, depends where you're talking about in Europe, of course. But that does hit the kind of mass market. You know, it's the middle class who travelled once a year, potentially to Europe, to maybe a southern European country for 2 or 3 weeks, have either had to cut that down to 1 week or 10 days, or have decided to substitute that and go domestically. It's not affecting so much those people who go on city breaks regularly because they can still travel abroad. But obviously with the reduction in low-cost airlines, that may impact on that segment eventually. So they may just go, you know, once a year to Europe instead of 3 or 4 times.
And also you mentioned the possibility of doing offers for Russians. That should be possible because they have different holiday timings to the rest of Europe, especially for Christmas, New Year, which is about a week later than everybody else.
Exactly.
It is happening.
Ours is a little earlier, as they would doubtless see it, but I know what you mean.
I can answer your question about, I think actually it's you, Tony, who asked this question, how the industry is dealing with the market condition. And quite a few countries are taking this matter very seriously because they largely depend on the Russian tourists. And for example, Egypt, the Minister of Tourism of Egypt is now planning a visit to Russia, Mr. Hisham Zazou, I think. And they are planning to introduce the payments for the hotels in rubles so that the Russian tourists wouldn't be that much dependent on the currency fluctuations, and the same might happen with the Turkish hotels next year.
Right.
Apart from that, the charter flights from Turkey and Israel are subsidized by the countries. So they would pay about $30 or dollars in this case for each tourist who comes into the country on these flights. So the airline wouldn't be at a loss if they don't fill the planes fully. So there are lots of things happening. And about hostile Europe, I think we shouldn't really mix intergovernmental relationship with a relationship of business and cultural relationship between the countries, because I'm sure that, okay, there are countries in Europe who are not in their best state relationship with Russia at the moment. However, if you speak to average citizens, as you and me and the rest of us, private businesses are suffering. The hotels are suffering, so they will only be that happy to have Russians back. And I think those few Russians who are still coming, they are being treated even better than before, because there are so few of them, and they don't want to scare them off so that they go back home and say to their friends, oh, we're not going back to Germany, you know, they're still talking about the Second World War there, or that airplane. I think people are trying to be extra careful now and extra sensitive so that it doesn't go to the next level. So, so many people, so many businesses had to lay off their Russian-speaking staff simply because they don't have jobs anymore. There are not that many Russian groups coming, and it's not helping anyone.
And indeed, I mean, I was reading a piece the other day about how the UK, but this is not unique to the UK, that culture and tourism are, of course, the strongest remaining conduits. I mean, as you know, there's a big exhibition of the USSR's space program and cosmonauts at the Science Museum, which got a lot of publicity here. And exchanges culturally and for tourism are, of course, potentially made more important by these sort of diplomatic government-to-government difficulties, one might argue.
Well, I think that nobody's put off by, the present situation. You're not going to say, I'm not going to go to the Bolshoi Ballet because of this present situation. So I think that people, see a bit further than that, actually. Yeah. And it's really down to kind of cost and, flexibility also. The visas, okay, they've been introduced. For those of you who are not aware, basically, the Schengen zone introduced what's called the VIS into Russia in mid-September, which means that everyone applying for a Schengen visa has to actually go and have their fingerprints taken before they can apply. But the good news is that they are kept for at least 5 years. They're shared between all the Schengen countries, so it's only required to be done once. And unless you're a kind of terrorist suspect, you're very unlikely to be asked to do that again. So in fact, it's just one process which you have to do once, and then it's completed for 5 years. So there may be a little bit of a rush to do it before the kind of Christmas, New Year period. For those people who don't know about it, but in general, they've tried to inform people. Definitely the travel industry is well informed about that. And luckily they introduced it in mid-September, which is kind of the end of the main summer period, or towards the end of it. So they didn't introduce it in, for example, May or June, when it might have really created a disaster because people wouldn't have been able to do it in time in order to go on their summer holidays. So I think that that's not a major issue. It's an inconvenience. It's an inconvenience. I know that British people also have to do now fingerprints for Russia. And Britain's actually been requesting fingerprints from Russians for at least 5 or 6 years, haven't they? So Britain's managed to still attract Russian tourists, even with doing fingerprints. So I don't think that this is going to be something which stops traffic particularly, but it's just an inconvenience. It's another little barrier that you have to do something. And if you decide you want to go away next weekend because you have a holiday, then you're probably not going to think of somewhere within the Schengen zone unless you've already done the fingerprinting. You'll go somewhere which is visa-free.
Okay, good. Let's take another question or thought from the audience. Yes, there's one in the middle there.
Thank you. My question is, obviously the external factor definitely impacted, but I feel that it was a little bit out of control of lots of European destinations. So how much the fact of a lack of strategy on the Russian market has impacted? Because if you see the share of Russians to European destination is very high, like is dependent on Turkey and Ukraine. So not considering the external factor, do you think the European destination are a little bit late on the strategy? Do you think they need to revisit a clear strategy for the Russian market, or are we on the right track?
I mean, do you mean individual countries?
Well, I would say both, like as branding Europe and also individual countries.
Okay, right, great question. Are European countries sort of simply not trying hard enough, really? I'm slightly summarize that.
Before this economical crisis, it was absolutely fine, and Russians still grow to go to Europe, because before this it was like a barrier in a language, but now it's gone. Mostly use a Google Translate things and other apps to do this, and it's no really problem. My parents who don't know English or any other languages going to Spain and they use an iPad with Google Translate. It's no problem at all. There is no strategy was before, and I think without strategy it could be absolutely fine. But now crisis, it's make some corrective and change. And now the strategy should be applied. Now maybe a little bit late if Europe Union and some countries started a year before. Now it was some offers already on the market, and it's possible to buy it. But if you will start now, next year it could help really.
And I mean, what message would most easily work? I mean, what kind of advice? We heard earlier on about a European brand, which was a fascinating idea. What would work best, do you think? But not just a brand, but what messages can countries and Europe as a whole send to Russians to convince them that they should set off to Europe? What would be a good short piece of advice be?
Oh, it's not easy question because...
No, it's not an easy question, but advertising companies make a fortune out of this.
Yeah, I think they need to be reinforced the welcome, that they are welcome.
Yes.
If there are any doubters, but I think in general people are not doubting this. But I think we need to, and also the added value that we can provide, which obviously places like Egypt are kind of much further ahead. They're already there, they're already making the deals, they're already sitting down talking with the Russian authorities or the Russian tour operators, I don't know who they're talking to exactly, but you know, they're already kind of making big concessions. Obviously, the Russian market is absolutely vital for Egypt. It's their number one source market, and it's probably the one source market which they can kind of keep more easily than some of the other source markets.
Russian tourists are hardy. They keep going, don't they?
Yeah,
they're not put off
and they've kind of
returned
quite well after the crisis in Egypt. But obviously, we see it's kind of almost back to my argument earlier that sometimes Europe is not flexible enough. You know, we're too much stuck in our little routines. We've made that plan, it's going to be implemented, it doesn't really matter what the environment around us is doing. And we sometimes are not fast enough, whereas some of the competitor destinations are really much more flexible, much more able to kind of come in with government money to support things like charters. This obviously, you know, keeps the traffic moving in the right direction, and definitely for Southern European destinations, that could be a policy for them. But I think it's also offering Europe to say that it's not only an exclusive and culture destination, which of course it is, but it also can offer, you know, more economic options that you don't have to stay in a 4-star hotel. And I think, you know, the sharing economy like Airbnb does offer that possibility. And that's becoming increasingly interesting for Russians, actually, who are traveling to Europe and don't want to spend as much as maybe they did 2 years ago.
Thank you. Maria, do you any ideas to what might be a message to send?
I think it's never too late. It's better to do it now than regret it in the end of next year, having witnessed another decrease of 50% from the Russian market. So I urge everyone who is trying to do something to go ahead. And I think the value is the main subject. I agree that the tourists would downgrade the hotel class. It's not going to be 5-star for everyone anymore. It might be 3 or 4 stars for half of the tourists probably. Luxury tourists will continue to travel to exclusive hotels, no doubt about that. The luxury segment actually didn't drop that much at all. So those people who holiday in 4 seasons, they will not be going on a charter flight to Turkey at all, ever. So if you are in this sector, you shouldn't worry. But the value is the main problem. So as long as Europe can offer value to the Russians, and friendliness is one thing, but I don't think that it's a big problem in Russia. It's for consumers, for the end tourists. They don't really go deep into politics and think, oh, will they accept us or will we have any problems? The price they pay for the trip with ever fluctuating national currency is the biggest issue. But what I wanted to add to this about what Europe can do, lots of non-European countries are actually doing a lot, and they see this crisis as the time of opportunities, and they are opening representative offices in Russia, such as Brazil. Embratur opened an office this year in Russia with a view to attract more Russian tourists, which they had about 40,000. It is a massive growth compared to when they first started their promotional activities in the country, and they will succeed. Brazil, Russia, there is a lot of friendship and business relationship between these two countries. So while Europe might be kind of waiting out and waiting to see what might happen, what Mr. Putin does next, other countries don't do such thing. They just go ahead and develop the market nonetheless. And it's not a surprise that Iran is now a big player in Russia. 2 weeks ago, they introduced a visa-free regime to the Russian tourists. So it's visa on arrival. And it's a difficult destination. It's not for independent tourists, and you wouldn't want to go there with your family for a beach holiday. But it is a very interesting destination, and it might be a good alternative to some other places, not in Europe necessarily, but they're investing a lot in this, and I'm sure they will be successful in 5 years or so. So it's interesting to see what other countries are doing, not what European countries are not doing.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely. Yeah. I mean, knowing, yes, Fedor, yes.
Yeah, and also it's a good opportunity for classic tour operator to compete with online, because it's a big topic. And if 1 year ago, most of the tourists who go into Europe book their holidays through online, buy tickets online, book hotel online, and now they try, but the price in online sources is regular. There is no special promotions, no special things. But classic tour operators could offer packages, short-time break with again special rates and special promotion. And it's a good time to try acquire this market and came to this market with good deals, and it could really work. But it's not about excursion and this ground service. It's just flight plus hotel, maybe something more, but not a whole program.
Okay, easier and cheaper, it seems to me, is one of the key messages from this discussion, and there's nothing other than wise about that. Can we take one more, because we need to stop for a tea break in a moment, but I just one more thought or comment on Russia or question for our panel. Feel free to ask a question as well as. Okay. Well, look. I mean, let me just finish it off myself with a question or a thought. I mean, the Russian, 140 million people, in Russia,
Yeah.
150 million people. Once the oil price perks up again, which it undoubtedly will, and money floods back into economies that are heavily dependent on oil and gas, which Russia is clearly one of several, do you think that Europe will just sort of always now be left behind, and that Brazil and others will have, picked up the initiative, or is it still a place that mainstream Europe can rebuild relatively quickly, assuming that the politics also will ease at some point? So
Europe is, Russia geographically is still part of Europe.
Yeah, of
so
course.
even though, somebody who may have taken a holiday in Europe will go to Brazil one year, I don't think they're going to go year after year to Brazil. just like any other European.
Sure.
So Europe is always going to be the most obvious place for Russians to go to Europe and a place to go on holiday. So certainly for short breaks, we dominate. And I totally agree with Fyodor, what he said, that a lot more companies should be in Europe creating these packages around these, like 7. We have like sort of long weekends, around International Women's Day, different half-term holidays when many Russians have 3 or 4 days off, or they can combine it with the weekends. You can't really go anywhere else apart from Europe. You could, with a push, go to some destinations in the Middle East, but you're really not going to go that far because you don't have that many days. On the other hand, we definitely shouldn't be complacent and just think, oh, well, we'll get back the market share anyway. Whoever fights hardest at the end of the day will get, the clients to go there. And definitely that's what countries like Egypt, how they became, the second most important destination, which they were before the crisis. How they got that volume of Russians was because they're very persistent and they invest a lot in promotion. They are doing different activities all the time. And frankly speaking, many European destinations, you don't see much about them online. They go to the traditional, they do the works that they've always done for the last 10 years. They don't have a big presence online. Thank goodness Visit Britain is there doing their part and putting out information all the time in the local language.
Great. Fedor.
I'm fully agree with Helen that it's absolutely Russian tourists will come back to Europe as soon as oil price will go up, and they will came back as price will be the same. Just we need some time to be fine with this new reality of the exchange rate, and everything will be fine. And Europe is really short break destination for the weekend, and nothing can replace it except of Russian citizens. Of course, so we're still developing, and now is Kazan, Nizhny Novgorod, Sochi is one of the best places inside Russia for the short breaks. And in a few years, I think we'll have more cities. And this also we can offer for European citizens and ask them to come to us, because now service level in Russia is on a quite high level, how Helen said, and it's really we have a lot of perfect restaurants, good hotels, and place to see and to visit. And our summer destination in Sochi is quite good, and winter Krasnaya Polyana after Olympic Games could easily compete with some Alps resort. And again, exchange rate helps European to visit us, because now 2 times cheaper than a year ago, and it's a quite good offer. And also we shouldn't forget about this. But here we have only maybe visa issues, because to get a Russian visa, I think it's much difficult than to get Schengen.
It's not easy. It was never very easy in my experience in the past, having been to a number of conferences long before the recent issues, but that's something that we all need to work on. Maria?
I'm sure Europe will bounce back simply because there is only one Colosseum, only one Paris, one Big Ben. So Russians are really cultural people. Apart from beach holidays, they would like to see attractions, historical places. So Europe is #1 destination in the world for cultural heritage. So it will bounce back if there will be any rooms left after Chinese and Indian tourists in Europe for Russians. It's just a matter of economical stability in the country, and I think Russians are traveling that much less these days, simply because there is no certainty about their future. Will they have jobs tomorrow? How low can the ruble fall? And what will happen with the country? Because there is something new every day. So hopefully 2016 will be better.
Okay, well, there we are back onto oil and gas prices. Anyway, look, and not only that, I'd like to thank Maria, Fedor, Helen for their fascinating insights and openness, frankly, about talking about these issues. We will now take a brief tea break, or coffee break it says here, but I'm sure there'll be tea as well. And we're going to hear more about it.
Yeah, just one thing. If we could start again at 5:02, we will finish earlier, and we'll avoid the crowds of people who will be outside at the end of the day coming in here to watch a film. So if you could all be back in here at 5:02, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Round of applause.
Thank you very much.